By mid-morning, the German engineers had arrived, their boots crunching over frost-hardened mud as they approached the Sherman. Major Karl-Heinz Richter, a meticulous man in his early 40s with a jagged scar across his cheek, led the inspection. You can almost feel the chill of the wind biting through their wool coats as they circled the tank. Rifles slung, but eyes wide with curiosity and unease. The Sherman's turret gleamed under the muted sun, the 75mm gun staring down like the eye of a predator. Richter tapped the barrel, almost expecting it to recoil, but it was cold, still, deadly silent. The engineers pried open hatches and crawled inside, notebooks at the ready. Every gear, every rivet, every weld was documented. They spoke in hushed German, their voices carrying the mix of awe and dread that comes when facing something you cannot immediately conquer. The first test was simple, yet terrifying. A controlled live-fire exercise. The Germans positioned their Pak-40 anti-tank gun at 500 yards, the crisp whistle of rounds slicing through the morning air. Vogel watched from a distance, stomach tight, heart hammering as shells slammed into the Sherman's armor. Sparks flew, metal groaned, smoke curled, and yet the Sherman barely shuddered. Richter's face was pale, the usual crisp authority replaced by disbelief. "Unglitch," he muttered. The tank's sloped armor deflected rounds like water off a duck's back. You can almost feel the engineers' frustration, their meticulous calculations crashing against a machine that seemed to defy physics, logic, even the grim reality of war, inside the Sherman. The controls were surprisingly smooth. The Germans noted its mobility, the precision of its steering, the ease with which the driver could pivot the entire chassis. The tracks, almost deceptively simple, absorbed mud, rubble, and cratered terrain without hesitation. And then came the most chilling discovery. The tank's gun could return fire almost instantly. The engineers realized that at 500 yards, their most reliable weapon could barely scratch it, while the Sherman could obliterate their positions in seconds. They scribbled frantic notes, tested every angle, every shell type. With each failed attempt, the truth sank deeper. This was not a tank that could be beaten conventionally. This was a war machine that demanded fear, respect, and perhaps a new strategy entirely by dusk. As the fog rolled across the fields and the wind howled through shattered trees, the engineers finally stepped back, exhausted, unsettled. Vogel lingered nearby, staring at the Sherman as it sat like a sentinel over the battlefield. The realization was unanimous and unspoken. If these machines were in full numbers, the German advance could falter under them, and yet, a question gnawed at everyone's mind in the fading light. If a single Sherman could shrug off their best artillery at 500 yards, what horrors awaited when entire battalions rolled onto the field? Night had settled over Normandy, a cold fog creeping across the shattered fields like a silent spectre. Inside the engineers' makeshift tent, maps and blueprints lay scattered across a wooden table, flickering candlelight casting long, jittering shadows. Major Richter rubbed his eyes, staring at sketches of the Sherman's armor and armament. Every calculation, every theory, every tactic they had relied on seemed suddenly obsolete. You can almost feel the panic pressing in, the weight of impending failure tightening around their shoulders like a vice. The Sherman wasn't just a tank, it was a herald of a new kind of warfare, one the Germans hadn't anticipated, one that demanded an entirely new mindset. Lieutenant Fritz Weber, normally precise and confident, ran his fingers through his hair, muttering figures under his breath, even at 500 yards. It's invulnerable. Every round, every attempt, nothing works. His voice trembled with disbelief. Outside, you could hear the distant rumble of Allied artillery. A grim reminder that this was no theoretical exercise. This was the battlefield reality staring them in the face. They had always prided themselves on engineering supremacy, on precision, on the certainty that their calculations could defeat any enemy weapon. And yet, here it was, a single Sherman tank, mocking every assumption they had ever made. The realization hit hardest in the silent moments between discussions. Richter imagined the battlefield as it might unfold, Sherman after Sherman, rolling over hedgerows, shrugging off their shells, returning fire with deadly accuracy. Villages would burn before German defenses could respond. Entire battalions would crumble under fire they had no way to stop. You can almost feel the cold sweat on the backs of their necks as they calculated the implications. It wasn't just about a tank, it was about a shift in the rules of engagement. The old doctrines, the well-drilled strategies, the confidence in croup steel and precise artillery, it all seemed to vanish in the shadow of this American machine. Outside, Vogel crouched in the mist, listening to the quiet murmurs inside the tent. He thought about his comrades, about the endless nights spent patching Panzer IVs and Panther tanks, about the grinding fear of being on the wrong side of a gun. The Sherman was more than armor and firepower. It was hope turned nightmare for the Germans, a symbol that their technological dominance was no longer guaranteed. Every second the engineers studied it, every angle they measured, deepened a truth they couldn't ignore. They were facing a weapon they could not stop at conventional range. And then, in the quietest moment, Richter whispered aloud, almost to himself, "If we cannot destroy it at 500 yards, how do we fight it at all?" The question hung in the cold night air like a death knell, unspoken but understood by everyone in the tent. Outside, the fog thickened. Somewhere in the distance, the faint rumble of tanks and artillery reminded them that the real battle was not theoretical, it was imminent. And with that realization, a silent dread settled over the engineers, heavier than the mud under their boots, heavier than the winter wind cutting across the fields.